All right. Natalie, did you want to begin or?
Yeah, I'll begin. Nicole, so what brought you to writing in the first place? As a child, were books a big part of your life?
Oh yes, my mother is French and Belgian. My father was Polish, and we lived in America. So a way to, it was funny. I didn't watch a lot of TV growing up, and it was very important to read. And I read ever since I was a child. I used to create library books for my dolls, and I put, and we put like little picture books, and then to be able to check out the books in the library. It was very sad, but I couldn't imagine being anything else than a writer. It's what I've always done all my life.
Fantastic. Do you want me to continue, Christina?
Well, I did have a question, Nicole, about your routine as a writer. I'm always interested in that. What is your work process like in a typical day?
Well, I have an office, and so I get up every morning and we walk the dogs and we have breakfast, and then I come into my office about 8:30, and about 8:15, somewhere there. And I do a lot of business at that time because what's funny about being a writer, you always think, oh, the creative process, all you do is write, 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 and it's like a crazy amount of actual business, where you have to, talk to your assistant about stuff, or you have to get things answered, and people want things like photographs or this or that, which is lovely, but it's very time consuming. And I can spend until about 10 o'clock in the morning just responding to readers who write me, book clubs who want to do things. It's really amazing how much physical work there is that has nothing to do with writing. So then after you've done all this stuff, and you've checked Twitter and all this kind of crazy things that you have to do these days, then it's time to write. Well, but sometimes you don't really feel like writing because somebody's driven you nuts, for example, or there's just you've talked to your agent and you're spinning about some other thing, and so it's really weird. Then you have to kind of like take a break, maybe go walk the dogs, or go. The dogs are great because they always need something, so you have to get up and get away from the desk and come back. But I'll write then I'll just write the whole afternoon, and usually about 4 o'clock. Well, sometimes I finish about 6 or 7, but usually about 4 o'clock I'll try to knock off again. And I always learning languages, new languages, and so I'll try to study Rosetta Stone and try to work on my Italian. Right now, my Polish publisher is going to tour me in Warsaw in January, which is going to be great. Loveliness, wonderful hotel, but really January. And so I'm
Yeah.
learning a little Polish, like phrases like "I am frigid." Where is the vodka? I mean, what was I thinking? These will be phrases I'll be learning in the next few weeks. So,
The important ones.
yeah, very important ones. But the bulk of the day is really spent working on books. And my process is, it's funny because I have like 100 pages of my new novel right here. I'm leaning over to get it. And so what I'll do is I go through and I read it aloud, and I look at the page very carefully. And I read every word, because if you think about it, you really don't read every word when you read. You just don't.
Right.
When you're editing, you have to read every word. And so when I do that, it really makes me understand the work, and I try to think of it as another reader. And then I start the day and I pick up what I messed up or what I need to illuminate, or and then I start to find that I'll push into a next chapter. So you just kind of like keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So there you are, 100 pages. Woof.
Wow. So you write whether you feel like it or not, it sounds like.
My job. It's what I
Yeah.
do for a living.
Yeah.
I'm one of the few creatures, I think, in the world who really can say I'm a novelist. That's what I actually do for money. So I mean, it's for love too, but it supports me, and it supports my house. And people don't think that. It's really interesting to me when people come and fix the house or something. They say, "Oh, I heard you write. Give me a book." And you have a few for those occasions, but it's such a weird thing. People just think like they're free, and you've got a bazillion of them that you could just hand out to people. They don't see it as a business.
Right.
And that's really the crazy thing, because when you write, it's art. But when you're done, it's really a business, and you really have to do all these business things. And if you're not good at it, it makes it very hard.
Has the promotional process changed much for you in the last few years in terms of Facebook and Twitter and things like that? Sorry, Christian, I know you wanted to ask about this, because I've been noticing everybody is on Twitter. And is it just a really good way for you of publicising what you do now?
Well, honestly, if you think about it, I mean, you're on Twitter, but how many times do you actually buy something that you read about on Twitter or Facebook? Maybe a
Yeah.
couple of times. So, I mean, you have to keep in mind, and this is the delicate balance in this sort of brave new world. Um, I've written a book about this actually for Writer's Digest called The Constant Art of Being a Writer. It really is about the business of fiction, of a literary fiction. So, your publisher always says, tweet, tweet, tweet. One of my publishers actually sent me hand cream recently so that I could, to tweet and Facebook. And as much as I like to talk to my fans, honestly, they don't really want to hear from me. I mean, they kind of want to hear from me every now and then. Shut up, just give me a new book. I mean, they really don't. I'm not that interesting, let's face it. So I take pictures of farmers markets during the season, or I just take a lot of photographs because I'm also a photographer, and I Facebook that. But honestly, does it sell books? No. Is it fun? Yeah, it's nice. But does it give you a chance to talk to your readers? Of course it does. But what's my job? Chit chat or write that next novel?
Right.
And I think it's really write that next novel, because who cares that I spoke to you on Twitter? But if I write something that makes somebody think a little bit and changes the world for just a second, then that's much more important than tweeting or Facebooking. It's silly. It doesn't really. When I started out in this business, which was a few years ago, my first book, In the Company of Angels, they thought it would be so great if it's just word of mouth. We'll put it out in the world, and it's a great book, so everybody will buy it. And that was right when the internet really started kicking in, where people were starting to really look at the internet and look at Amazon.com reviews and stuff. And honestly, it didn't work. I mean, it hit the bestseller list. It was on the New York Times list for like a week on the extended list, but that was just luck. And then they took an ad out, to sort of like try to bolster sales, but they were trying to see an experiment. And thanks for experimenting with my book. But it's just one of those things, like, that's what all the publishers hope, that there's word of mouth. Like with this book club, they're hoping that you'll tell 6 or 7 friends, and those friends will actually go out and buy the book. But it used to be back in the day, like Cold Mountain, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with this book. It was a book about the Civil War.
Oh, right.
And Charles Frazier wrote it, and this was his one book. And it took him, like, I don't know, 17 years or something to write this book. It was really quite the work. And it came out, and nobody bought it. It was critically reviewed. Everybody loved it who saw it, but nobody bought it. And this one bookstore, which I think is still true in the UK, because White Truffles is out in the UK now, but there's still that what's called the word of mouth selling or hand selling. They try to hand sell the book. But anyways, this one bookstore said, this is a brilliant book and it shouldn't die. And so they told everybody and told everybody and told everybody to tell everybody. And suddenly the book was actually out of print at this point, had fallen out of print, because the publisher only keeps it in print for like 3 months. It's like, yeah, you didn't sell it. Yeah, it's fine. Crazy. So it just like suddenly people started buying it and buying it and buying it, and they started printing them, and then of course it became the bestseller. It was on the list for, I don't know, a couple years or some crazy thing. But a lot of things like Da Vinci Code, the Da Vinci Code, everybody thinks what a great, book, and it was blah, blah, blah. But poor Dan Brown, I mean, he had that thing in the back of his car, and he was riding around really just stopping people going, have you seen my book, So, I mean, that's not a good publicity model. But, I mean, sometimes you have to do that kind of thing. And so if you're not prepared to do that, either electronically, it's very difficult in this environment.
I was at a book event with Neil Stevenson a month or two ago, and he was having to explain a comment he'd made about how he wanted all of his interaction with his fans to be via FedEx once every 3 years, something like this. And so he's having to backtrack a little bit and say, no, I do appreciate fan interaction, but very much the same thing you're saying, that he can choose to write or he can choose to spend time answering emails and on Twitter. It sounds like it's just the eternal struggle for writers.
I think it is. It's really funny. You talk about like Updike. Updike always answered his letters. He always took a time. He just sat down and answered his letters. And I always make it a point to answer things. But when people write you and they say, "Here's my manuscript. I know you have Lisa Bankoff's your agent. She's Ann Patchett's agent. So please give this to her." And you're just like, and you write them back and you say, I can't do that. They get really angry. And you're like, okay, that just doesn't seem fair. It just like, don't be angry with me. It's not my fault. I had to work hard to get an agent. I wrote a manuscript and sent it to agents. And, we sent it to 5. And 4 of them wanted it. It was just like, okay, that's good, But I worked a long time, just day and night, just kind of working and crafting. My work is real meticulous, it's very crafted. And so, I don't know. It's just like there's no silver bullet. You just work. You work and you work and you work and you're cranky to everybody who loves you and you go through all this stuff and you try very hard not to be, but it's a very tough job. I was a newscaster for the local CNN affiliate for many years and produced, TV and stuff. And that was an easier job to be like the anchor and a reporter and then to do this. This is really hard, Not to feel sorry for me because I love it, but you know what I'm saying. It's not easy. There's no pity here. No. But I
How
will.
do you I just got one question that just suddenly cropped to my mind the other day. How do you feel about things like Kindle against actually having a book in your hand if you were to read something? I was discussing something with some friends the other night, and they were, "Oh no, I just can't possibly get on board with having a Kindle. I have to have the book in my hand." And I was just wondering how you felt about that.
Oh, I think anything that sells books and get people reading is important. Frankly, I not only have a Kindle, but I have an iBook, and so when I travel, like I'm going to be in Warsaw, for January. You're gonna bet your bottom dollar I'm gonna be taking over quite a few electronic books, some movies, but what I find, and a lot of my friends do this too, real people who love books, love books, what will happen is that I'll take this and I'll read something on Kindle, and if I really like it, I'll buy the book. So you've gotten 2 sales out of me, and I've actually spoken to a lot of people that this is true. They do the same thing. If they like it on Kindle and they like the audio of it, they'll actually physically buy the book. So.
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I do.
Yeah, everybody does that because they love the book and they want to physically have the book. Because your Kindle runs out of batteries, let's face it. And you're always taking a big risk like iTunes. I think I must have $4 million worth of iTunes. But what happens if one day it gets all corrupted or the system goes down or something, it's gone. All that's gone, but a book you hold in your hands, what's really fun is I've got the different copies. This is the British copy.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is beautiful. They did a beautiful job. And then I toured Italy. This is the Italian version. And that was just really fun. And the American version is different too. So it's really fun to have, to see books in different cultures and to even to go to different places and realize how they value books. When I was in Rome, it was like I was a rock star. I was on all the television, all the radio, I was in the papers, and the same thing's going to be true when I go to Poland. But in America, it's like, yeah, we got a lot of writers. Yeah.
You've got a lot of everything.
Yeah, we're a big country. A lot of people don't recognize how doggone big we are. I I spent a lot of time in Europe, so I recognize, my parents are European, so I understand how small the world can really be.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
curious about what books you're reading now.
That's a good question. What is here on my desk? That's a good question. I'm reading this Gerald Stern is a good friend of poetry book. This is his last book from Norton called In Beauty Bright, which is a beautiful book. I've been loving this. Of all things, this is A Clockwork Orange.
oh,
Yeah, I started this on a New York subway.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a moment. But my Norton was the publisher of my last book, and they gave this to me when I visited, and I started reading it. And I've got to tell you, the sheer inventiveness of the language in here. I mean, Kubrick, made a film out of this that we all think about. But Burgess's actual book is phenomenal. I mean, it's violent. I just skim over the violence, but the language that he created, whole cloth, is dang amazing. And what else do I have? There's a few books hanging around here. I've been reading. I read the Junot Diaz's "This Is How You Lose Her." These are real books. They're on my Kindle too. How fun is that? And I've also been reading Telegraph Road, which is that new one by what's his name, Michael Chabon. So I've been reading, like, kind of digging through these books, and that was just funny to read the Clockwork Orange on a New York subway. Yeah, it's just like, wow, I'm scared. How about you? I hope no one on the subway knows what I'm reading. That's the nicest thing about Kindle. Nobody can see what you're reading. So if you're reading like 40 Shades of Grey, they don't know. It's like, what are you reading? Chaucer. Which is just a modern Chaucer, really. 40 Shades of Grey. I haven't read it. I haven't read it. But.
I've been half of one of them.
Have you?
Yeah, not my thing at all.
Well, there was such more interesting erotica years ago, like the George Owen things. People really thought that was well written too, but I haven't heard really good things about the writing style of 40 Shades.
No.
I mean, if you want to read erotica, go ahead. But I mean, it's just interesting. Like, I've not heard anybody say that's the new Nin. Oh my God, it's like Anna's Nin. They don't say that at all. They just go, it's trashy.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is.
Fashion, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, are you a member of a book club, or have you been?
No, I barely have time to breathe. I mean, really, it's funny here. We just finished our harvest, and so my husband and I put up a lot of things like sauerkraut, and I just before I came to talk to you, I put up 2 pecks of apples in to crisp to freeze. I mean, it's just kind of like there's the stuff of your life, and then when I sit down at my desk, I just fall into the rabbit hole of books. I mean, I don't really have a book club because I don't really ever get out.
Well, now, do you have any advice on the sauerkraut? I have tried and failed at sauerkraut.
So the most important thing to know about sauerkraut is to always make sure that it's in a very cool place.
Okay.
Make sure that when you put the brine in it, that the brine really has cooled. You don't want to put hot brine in there. And then make sure you've actually, they tell you to put a plate and put some cans on top of it. We've discovered that if you take those quart jars and you put it in a square container and you put the quart jars down, that it'll submerge the sauerkraut, and that's the key. Submerge that sauerkraut. Make extra brine if you need to, but you have to submerge it and pack it down really tightly. When we've had really good luck with sauerkraut, we do a lot of crowding here, but we do jams and everything, beets and it's just 2 of us, but it's just so nice to grow your own stuff, know where your stuff comes from. And that's very much like the Escoffier book. He was very much farm to table, of course, and he knew all his purveyors. And when I wrote the book, I started like thinking like Escoffier, and discovered that really, like we grow pumpkins every year now, so we get like 60 odd pumpkins. We use some of them for savory, and then we make pumpkin breads and jams, and we just eat that through the winter. I mean, and we live in a restaurant district. I mean, right across the street from us is a very lovely Italian restaurant, and then there's a Belgian pub right there that has gorgeous gourmet food and stuff. I mean, we actually live in a like a Georgetown. You think of Georgetown and that kind of thing. We live in an old Victorian house in an old Victorian district with fabulous restaurants up and down the street. Um, but we really like to know where and we eat there too. But I mean, it's funny at the house we really do pay a lot of attention to food. So
Yeah, yeah. Local food is really quite big here in the UK now. I volunteer at a local community garden that is promoting the growth of local food, and it's really interesting to see what you can actually grow and what you can do with it afterwards. Really interesting.
it really is. It is very fun. It makes you feel very accomplished. But yeah, before I sat down, so I don't have time for book club because before I sat down, I had to go ahead and make these six crumbles, which we'll eat through the winter, and freeze them. And two pecks of apples later, I'm with you.
Yeah. What do you now that you've sort of joined the ranks as a blogger with your blog that you've been writing? What do you think it is about food that makes people want to make something in their kitchen, take a photograph it, and say, you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to go on the internet and I'm going to post it for all the world to see. What is it about food, do you think, that makes people want to do that?
I don't really think it's about food. I really think it's about that people are feeling kind of helpless these days, and the internet gives everybody a chance to be a star for that moment. It gives them, it says, here, my life is good. And it reminds them when you see it on the internet, you recognize, yes, that was a lovely meal, or yes, that was a beautiful, pear that I saw. Or, it somehow validates your experience. They did a study recently that showed that, and I thought this interesting, where if you went on a Facebook, did a Facebook and read Twitter, you were more likely to overeat or to eat dessert. And it turns out because you feel better about yourself. And
Huh.
and I think that's true that when you see yourself in context of the world, you recognize that you have a voice and you have a moment. And in America, it's pretty dire. A lot of people are losing their houses, and it's true. Like and even if you think about the euro, the downfall of the euro has been horrible for Italy, and very few places have been unscathed. So I mean, UK has been well, and of course, Poland's doing incredibly because they kept their currency too, and the
Yeah.
Belgians always do well because they're the Belgians. They invented the stock market. They're gonna do well. They just are. But it's just kind of funny. So I think the internet is really more about feeling that you're a real person. You know.
Yeah. I read somewhere quite recently, somebody said, we've never had more outlets for communication in the form of mobile phones, things like Google Hangout, but yet we've never been lonelier.
We're very
Because we
lonely.
don't.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't really we don't communicate. We FaceTime, but we don't really communicate. I mean, we see each other, but we don't talk to each other. It's so hard to get. My husband and I were talking about who we'd like to have over for Christmas this year. To have because we don't have our parents or anything, and so we're trying to think about, well, who would we have for dinner? Well, who can carry on a good conversation? Who's interesting? Who has manners enough? I love somebody who's opinionated and a big pain, but well mannered, so they don't start. I mean, I need manners. I mean, I want a little manners, but they can be wildly opinionated and crazy, but they can't come after another guest or, I don't know. It's just funny. People have lost that kind of ability to really talk to each other. You know?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. You do, you kind of lose the art of conversation almost.
I mean, if you think about it, why do we have to go out at all? I mean, many of us work at home. And, there's really no need to go anywhere. You go to the movie theater, people are talking. Here in America, it drives me nuts. You go see a film. We don't go to films very often. Because people be just talking like you and I are talking. It's like, shut up. You know, and you no,
And
maybe
texting.
yeah, do not, and texting. Well,
Yeah.
they're texting when they're driving and stuff too. I mean, everybody is so distracted.
So what was it about Escoffier that made you want to write about him?
Well, it's a very good question. You know, when I was growing up, my mother was a had been shot during World War II, and it seemed to me that whenever she cooked from his cookbooks, you know, that gave her comfort. And so when she passed on, I started really looking at the Escoffier book, and I recognized that he had this very funny, charming way about him. You know, I mean, if you read the cookbooks, they're hysterical. And they really are kind of funny. And there's all this. And then I looked at his memoir, and there was like nothing there. It was just hardly anything. I thought, who's this guy? And then I found out that Ho Chi Minh was his pastry chef. Well, that sealed the deal. I had to, you know, I had to figure out who this guy was. And so I think that was just it. It was just he was so kind of interesting as a voice in his cookbooks, but it was so difficult, you know, to make this stuff. I mean, he simplified French cooking, but it's still doggone complicated, you know. I mean, I just kind of fell in love with him then, and I know that the man I wrote about, it's really not about writing about Escoffier in a way. It's about who we all are when we address the plate, you know, the magician, the you know, the hunger within all of us, you know. I mean, that's really what this book is about. It's not really about the real Escoffier, because you know that's obviously I didn't really write about him. I just used his words and his way in the world to create this world of the plate. You know?
And that's a balance to navigate, isn't it? You used a lot of historical facts and real people and dates, and yet created a work of fiction from them. What are the challenges in that?
Well, you know, the problem was is once I started, I got really excited writing about Escoffier, and then I realized that he had taken all that money from the Savoy, and that was like, how much? I mean, and what happened? And I started looking at that historical document, and I thought, oh my God. And the idea that he'd been separated from his wife for 30 years. You know, his wife just took off one day. And some of his recipes are a little bit like, hey, baby. I mean, they're dirty. They're just flat out dirty. Translated, they're dirty, you know? So it's kind of like, oh my gosh. So I sort of started thinking it can't really be about this man. It has to be sort of about the persona he leaves in the world. And there's a line in the book that I think is really true. The idea that truth doesn't matter so much, it's how we talk about ourselves. That is really becomes the truth. Because if you realize it, truth is really subjective. I mean, maybe if you get hit by a car, that's pretty true. But what's happened in an argument, as you know, I mean, you'll have one version and somebody else will have another version. It'll be completely different. But it's what happened. And sometimes when people tell you what they thought happened, you go, oh, I kind of remember that. So it's kind of the idea of like what really is truth. And I think this book really does look at the idea of what you say about yourself very telling of who you are, you know, because I really took how he saw himself and built the whole bones of this book on that, you know. Now, the fact that he was accused of all this stuff at the Savoy, and, you know, I've seen the documents. I'm going to have to go with probably true. But, you know, at the same time, I didn't want to defame him because there's really no need, you know. So I thought about what could he have done given how kind he was and how much money he had raised for charity and all these kinds of things. You know, and so I sort of created a construct about who he really was. I mean, you have a moral obligation to tell the truth, always, in a book. But you also have to be careful. Like right now, I'm doing a book called The Pink Suit, and it's about the most famous pink suit in American history. It's about the suit that Jackie Kennedy wore on the day that her husband was assassinated, which many people think is a Chanel, but is not. It's a knockoff that was made by an Irish immigrant to America. Fake. And so it's really this book about how this suit impacted her life and who she really was. Now, a lot of who she was is what people remember of her. And what's interesting in the book is that Jackie's never named by name, and neither is because there's enough Kennedy books. We don't care about them. It's really about mythology. I mean, we do care about them, but I mean, it's really about mythology and this American myth and how myth shapes and changes, because everybody tells stories about her, but you never even see her in the book. There's all these collections of stories about she comes in and out of these fittings and stuff, but this is the woman who created the final fittings. And the weirdest thing I found out about her was that she had taken as kind of a hobby to creating the things that she made for Jackie for her own niece. So you can imagine that suit wasn't just created right before Dallas. That was 3 years of wearing that suit in various places. And so it's a very interesting story about how fame touches people and fame moves, that whole idea of mythology and how do average people like us really deal with the real famous? See, everybody thinks knows Jackie Kennedy, but she doesn't. She's never even met her. Because all she does is the final sewing in the back room. So everybody in her neighborhood thinks she knows her and she can change things. She can stop the civil rights movement. Some people don't want the civil rights movement at the time in her neighborhood. So I went to Inwood, where she's from, and I researched the whole thing. I mean, the subways and the whole 9 yards about who she was and where she was in this world. So
Wow.
it's a lot of work, and it really is. And to really, especially when you're writing about a real place where people can remember Kate, or they remembered someone. Now her family's given me the right to write about her, and they understand that she's going to be fictionalized, and but I have to fictionalize her within parameters of who she really was, what she did. And so I hear all these stories and I think, okay, because nobody really remembers Kate that well anymore. She was just one of those really quiet footnote people that nobody knew. She's private, but she knew all the really famous people in fashion, and a lot about how these Chanel things are sewn, because they're crazy difficult to do. I mean, like the front piece of the jacket, you think it's one piece of fabric, right? You cut the pattern out? No. It's all pieced together because it's made with this such delicate fabric that it all has to be stitched, and all the stitches have to be perfect so that they actually look seamless and invisible. That's the level that she worked at. I mean, and she got paid $14 a week. And so she's making suits that are like thousands of dollars, right? And she gets $14 a week, and she was the person who created the signature of all the Chanel suits. All the Chanel suits have chains in the bottom of them so they hang properly. Who knows?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, what's cool about the thing, it was actually what's called a line by line replica, which means that she had to sew it. It had to be sewn completely by hand. Even though it was ripped off, as we would think about it, it wasn't. There was an agreement between Chanel and the Chez Nignon, that was the place where Kate worked, who made these kind of knockoffs, and it had to be done a particular way and sewn a particular way. And I mean, Linton Fabrics in Cumbria did the fabric for it, and they even knew the sheet that it came from. So, I mean, it's a freakishly interesting thing. I don't know. I'm enjoying it, but,
We might have to add ladies wearing to our book club, Christina, so we can add that to our reading list.
That's right.
It really, the fact, if you're even not a seamstress, what's really interesting is that I had a few pages of it, and I wanted to apply for a grant. And so a friend of mine who I knew who's a writer, I said, could you, because he'd worked at the NEA, the National Endowment of the Arts, and I sat on NEA panels there. I said, could you put a good word in for me? Here's what I'm doing. Here's a few pages. Well, I didn't realize that he became an editor of a quarterly, and he's like, I need to publish this. And what he loved about it was just guys like it because the sort of like the construction element of how difficult it is to make these suits and how intricate they are. It just like appeals to men. And I thought, really? And he's not the first man who's read these pages and thought, this is really interesting. It's constructed, and it's quite a job, I don't know. We'll see what happens, won't we?
So this is a very different book from White Truffles, and you've written several books, and it seems to me that they're all very different. Is there a theme that runs through them? What connects them, if anything?
I think there's a certain brokenheartedness in all of them. And I believe that novelists are geographers of the heart, And so I think that there's all those characters in there who, even if they're funny, I did some funny Florida books, but they're not that. There's some darkness in there, but there is that definite brokenheartedness, even though they're very funny and charming, and there's still that. I mean, that's, I guess, my theme. I lost my daughter when she was very young, and I just never gotten over that. And I think I just understand loss in that really profoundly deep way, and the idea of allowing people to overcome loss. When I was a reporter, a television reporter, I was in the field covering all these things, these shootings and stuff, where I couldn't change the ending. I was in gang shootings, and I was always covering these horrible stories. I see everybody on their worst day as a reporter, But when you're a writer, you can rewrite it, you can change it, you can shift it. It might not be the happiest ending ever, but it's better.
We've just finished reading, or almost just finished reading, Make the Bread, Buy the Butter, by Jennifer Reese. And she's, if you're familiar with the book, she sets off on a journey to find out why some mass-produced foods are better made at home and why some are still better bought from the supermarket. What are your opinions on mass-produced food?
Well, I think there's a time and a place for it, of course. I mean, and certain things better that they could do better. I mean, I was telling my husband, I think that the food sort of frenzy, the food craze or trend is about over. I think we're like at the end of it, because what's happening is people are realizing I can have 400 cookbooks, I can get all the cool stuff from all the cooking stores, but then I have to cook it.
Yeah.
That's like the problem, I mean, and I think that's like, my husband is going to make some donuts. He's going to make some applesauce donuts. And we were talking about how you can have a brilliant donut somewhere, and it's just so great. But to try to make them at home, it might not be as brilliant. So I think that there's, really a time and a place for store-bought and for, not mayonnaise ever. No mayonnaise from a tin. But there's a time and a place for all that kind of stuff. It just depends. You have to be very careful. Like, I'll eat at McDonald's. I mean, I'll eat like a fish sandwich at McDonald's without cheese and a light amount of tartar sauce and put pickles on it, and I call that lunch sometimes. Not often, but if I'm traveling, what are you going to do? Can't starve.
No, and it's quite difficult sometimes when you are traveling, when you're on the road, to actually find something to eat.
It is incredibly difficult. Yeah. I mean, but in America, it's funny, when I'm in Europe, I can eat anything and everything, but when I'm in America, I seem to there must be some preservatives in foods here, because I have a lot of allergies when it comes to food here, or I have too much salt and I just don't feel well. So it's easier for me to eat overseas than here, and which scares me, because it makes me wonder what we do to our food in a way, because the meat doesn't taste the same. And of course, chicken is a great example, because European chicken's so much better than our chickens. But it's not quite right, it's not, it's just, there's just something with it. It's not quite right. I don't know what it is. I don't know. But I just think, sometimes it's just, you have to eat someone else's food because they're a better cook than you are.
Let the experts do the donuts, right?
Don't you think? I mean, I've never made donuts, but I'm pretty sure this is not gonna turn out as good as I bring it to. I think. We have a fryer. It's just not gonna happen. But it'll be fun.
Right.
Great experiment, and if it does work, terrific. But if it doesn't work, it was fun, But you can't feed yourself that way. Seriously, you can't say, I can only make my donut. I can only, that's just crazy, because we don't have that kind of time in the day,
I think sometimes what you don't have that kind of money as well. Sometimes, because I think one thing we've learned from the book we've just finished is that she freely admits it costs her a lot of money to produce all these foods, and sometimes it is the cheaper option to go to the supermarkets.
Oh, I know. I mean, it is. It's incredibly expensive. We have a farm, so we'll put up a lot of stuff. We'll grow stuff there. But it's expensive to grow things. And sometimes you go to the farmer's market today, for example, the end of the last farmer's market, and for like $2, you can get like a half a peck of beets. Well, it costs you a lot more to raise a half a peck of beets than $2. But by the time you process it and stuff, you've got
Mm.
like a $4 pickled beet thing. Are pickled beets that important? I mean, if you grow your own beets, it's fun. But if you have to raise everything and do it all, and like it was a bad year for tomatoes. What do you do? I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I'm with you. I think sometimes, like we go to Costco, which is one of those big box stores where like you can get 4,000 things of pretzels for $2. but but then you're compelled to eat it because you have my parents were through the war and everything. I mean, we learned that we eat the food we get, so you have to be real careful with that too. It's while it's cheap, if you were raised like I was, I mean, you have to eat it.
Mhm.
But are you really going to eat 4 pounds of potato chips? Well, yeah, you are, but is that really the best possible thing? So.
So, with the abundance of cookbooks, TV shows, the internet, and all the rest of it, why do you think more people don't actually sit down and have a family meal together anymore?
Oh, I think that because we don't know how to talk, we don't know how to face each other, we don't know how to be a family. I mean, I know a lot of people and whose kids are just never eat with them, and they never really deal with their kids, except sort of fleetingly they'll take them out to the fast food restaurant for a minute. I mean, it's just kind of like I actually have friends who would not like require their kids to come and eat with them at mealtime. Or like we were making dinner and just about ready to serve, and the kid goes, "I'd rather have cereal," and they give him cereal. And it's like, honestly, I think it's because it's easier not to have an argument, and we don't know how to talk anymore to each other. I mean, it just seems to me like that's where parents are at. Nobody wants to argue. It's not worth it. Whatever. And I mean, if you think about it, the word whatever was never in our culture the way it is now. It's just the number one. You always hear people go, whatever, whatever. And it's like, well, it isn't whatever. It's like, sit at the table or I'll kill you. I mean, it's just kind of, what is wrong with you people? Eat. I mean, but it's just the whole idea that even my husband and I cannot find people who will sit at the dinner table and understand how to have a conversation. It's
Mhm.
difficult. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I had a very similar discussion with friends the other night about eating with your children, and I was the only one who actually sits every night at the table with my son, and we eat dinner together.
Yeah.
He's only 2.5. He's not much of a conversationalist, but we eat together nonetheless. And I think it's such a shame that more people don't do that.
Oh, it is. Of course, everybody goes, well, I'm busy, I'm busy. But I tell you, my father used to run a gas station. My mother would have dinner ready at 6. And even if she had to flap it together at 5:30 or 10 of 6 or whatever. Because my dad opened the garage very early. So he got home, he got cleaned up, got home at 6. If he was not at that table, he did not get dinner. There was
Mm.
no dinner for him. That was, everybody had to be at the table at a particular time. There was no, and I notice now that people allow their kids to eat like whatever they want whenever they want it. Cans of spaghetti, sauce, and stuff. It's like we just made a roast and you're eating spaghetti because you'd rather have spaghetti. You know, to me, that's the kind of thing that's egregious. And then they don't want to eat with the parents. They want to go eat somewhere else. You know, I don't know. I want to be Heidi Klum, but that's not happening. So, I mean, we just have to really do. We don't know how to be families anymore, I think. I know everybody's busy, but honest to God, like, why can't we sit down at least one day a week and eat with our family?
Mm.
Sundays used to be the big dinner day. It's happened.
It's a shame. It's a real shame.
It is.
So, if you're not at home cooking escoffier, what is your go-to dish? What's your quick dish that you just love to throw together?
Not at home cooking escoffier. I'm never at home cooking escoffier. I don't know. I'm a big fan of pasta because it's so easy to do. I don't eat a lot of meat, but I'll eat meat. But I'll just whip together some sort of pasta. It just depends what's around. See, the biggest problem in our neighborhood is we can go to the Thai restaurant, or we can go to the Belgian place across the street, which is really very good. And there's a bunch of restaurants down the street. There's a Russian restaurant. There's a couple of, it's like, so sometimes if we can't figure out what to make, we'll just go down the street, see what they're cooking. But I don't know, really a quick pasta in many ways is so lovely in a salad. Just in like the Italians do it, not a lot of cream or anything, just garlic and olive oil and anchovies or olives, and toss it all together, put a little bit of cheese on top of it, and call it dinner.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm a bad eater though. I will eat, if there's no one eating with me, I'll eat over this thing. It's not, I'm trying to change that, but I find it hard to cook for myself. I think it's difficult. So.
Christina, do you have some more questions?
I don't think so. Do you? I guess I just have the one final question I wanted to ask, which is, we are looking forward, Nicole, to you hopefully chipping into the Twitter discussion every now and then during November. But is there anything that you would like to say in more than 140 characters about the book? Now that you've got a chance.
Now that I have my chance.
Yeah.
Don't forget to read the back part of the book, because I do think the novel is based on the bones of fact. The notes in the back of the book, I think, is really important. And let me just finish by reading this, because I think this is very important for you to think about. Escoffier's cookbooks, memoir, letters, and articles about him created the voice of this character, but we all know that I did not write about the real man. The elegant savage found in these pages is who we all are when we address the plate. The magician, the priest, the dreamer, the artist. It is our most hungry self. And that is the only fact that truly matters. So, that's what I want to tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. It's very nice of you guys.
Yes.
Enjoy the
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You guys too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.